Points answered?
Yeah, just raise the point. Thank you.
Thank you. And just a reminder, if you could please state who you'd like to address your question to.
I have just three very quick points to make about consent and one question about marital rape. On the issue of consent, I think that firstly there are two legal safeguards against this entire idea of vengeful wives. Firstly, under Section 191 of the Penal Code, anybody who gives false information to the police can actually be liable for 6 months imprisonment, $3,000 fine, or both. Secondly, there's this idea of the standard of reasonable doubt, proof beyond reasonable doubt. And I think this particular standard exists because we have, this particular standard exists so that we can enable the prosecutors and the judges to be morally and legally certain of the guilt, so that society will be able to accept putting these people into jail for the crimes they have done. And that doesn't change in marital rape situations if and when it's criminalized. And the entire idea of consent seems to be that it's all very iffy, you can't prove it. But that's the whole point about introducing the mental element into the criminal law, to humanize the law so it doesn't become a strict liability or cause and effect criminal theory. So we have things like the intention to kill and murder. It's the same for consent in marital rape situations. It's very difficult to prove, but it exists so that we can enable these offenses to be more sophisticated and to actually make sure we catch the right criminals. So my question leading up to that is, why hasn't the argument from the constitutional perspective, and I believe Mr. Siu is somewhat familiar with that, why hasn't the argument from the constitutional perspective come up against this marital immunity? Because we have looked at it from a social perspective, an institutional perspective, a male perspective. However, we haven't seen that under Article 9, which gives all citizens equal protection under the law. That isn't the woman entitled to equal protection like all other strangers or citizens or people who get date raped? Why hasn't that come up in Parliament or in the newspaper reports or in cases or before the judiciary?
Well, that's a good question, and of course it completely embarrasses me, being the person who raised Article 9 in the petition. But you know, it's a good question, right? And I will play a little bit of the devil's advocate and tell you what the AGC response would be, if I may be so presumptuous. And the AGC response would be, well, Article 9 is subject to law. Right? It's subject to a whole host of carve-outs, and they'll be able to justify somehow this as an exception to Article 9. And that's what it is. I think I'm not sure that I can't, off the top of my head, conceive of an occasion for a constitutional challenge to this because it's a defense, right? I can't conceive of how a wife who has been raped would frame a constitutional challenge against Article 9 and strike this down just so that she can convict the husband. But I think you made a good point, and certainly I'm sure the No to Rape team taking note, and we'll bring it up as an additional argument to raise.
Sorry, just one point about CEDAW here. Under the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, Article 2 states very clearly that constitutions of individual countries must have an element that all citizens are equal under the law, regardless of race, religion, and gender. Ours does not have gender. And the state keeps putting a reservation because they do not want to include gender. They give two reasons why they do not want to include gender. They cite Sharia law, that this is our indigenous law and we must respect the rights of minority groups, and it does not harmonize with civil law. And the second reason is, of course, national service. We, in the women's groups, aware especially, we have been asking for this review, because there are other Muslim countries who are wholly Muslim who have no such reservations. So either we are all not looking at things properly or something, I do not know what's happening, so I do not want to overload the no to rate team, but I think if law students want to really look harder into why under our constitution gender does not have its rightful place, I think that's a very good thesis project to take on. Please share the work with the WARE. Thank you.
Well, I have a question.